Good afternoon, everyone, and good evening, whoever is joining from London. I am from London studio, heading data and AI team here at Method, and I will be your host today. I want to welcome you to today's topic. It's quite an exciting one for myself. Oh, that's better. Because it has been generating quite a lot of growth and drive in a business world, and you might have heard of a term called data monetization, a phrase. It is essentially a business practice of extracting value and commercial value out of your first-party data. So businesses are very eager, they are collecting lots of data, they want to monetize it and create a certain value out of it. And today I am extremely happy that because we have two leaders in the field of data and innovation joining us today. And I would like to welcome first Puopolo. He's the Chief Innovation Officer at DFW. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Also please welcome Joe Fuqua, Executive Vice President of Enterprise Data Frameworks, Standards and Tools at Truist Bank.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Great. So maybe we can take 5 minutes and you could perhaps introduce yourself in terms of what's your role at the current and your experience at the organizations that you're serving at.
Should I go first?
Yes, please.
All right, great. Hey, good afternoon again, Joe Fuqua. And as Lusine said, I'm head of enterprise data frameworks at Truist Bank. I've been there for about 6 months now. I've also taken ownership recently of cloud architecture and cloud security, separate topic. But in my role at Truist, I'm responsible for ensuring we have clear line of sight to data modernization within the organization. Our goal is to drive advancements in our architecture across the enterprise, help our business better serve our customers and look for cost efficiencies and what have you, just better utilize our data infrastructure. I've been in the technology space for longer than I care to admit, about 3 decades now. Started out in more of a scientific role at Oak Ridge National Lab, building neural networks back in the 1980s. And then progressed into business from there. I've been in financial services for about 20 years now, working across various banks in different roles in technology.
Thank you, Joe. And you, Paul?
So hello, everybody. Paul Puopolo, Head of Innovation, and now overseeing our data and analytics program at DFW Airport in Dallas-Fort Worth. Been in innovation for about 17 years now in large, complex organizations. And so was actually a resident here for 3 years working for MetLife Direct several years ago, and then went out to DFW to build their innovation program. For those of you who might not know DFW Airport, we are the 3rd busiest airport in the world. We have about 250 to 270,000 people every day that come through our airport. So if you think Bank of America Stadium, that's about 3.5 stadiums worth of people that come through our terminals every day. And so it's pretty exciting. We've got 7 runways. We are a city. We have major complex problems just like any other city does. And data is the foundation of how we try to do smarter and make smarter and better decisions. So the innovation team, our job is to look at emerging technologies, also to solve complex business problems and help digitize our operation at DFW. So
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Joe. So before we dive into the topic, I would love perhaps to hear your personal perspective on data. And have you always been the numbers person, or this is something has been grown as you got into your roles?
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, sure. Okay. So like I mentioned before, I've been a nerd my entire life, right? So I started out very early programming before I even went to college. And as I sort of went through my undergraduate degree, which is in physics and math, I picked up some fairly deep programming skills along the way. And so from a technology standpoint, I've always been into technology. What I discovered along the way, and I didn't really realize it at first, but data, and I mean, this is sort of goes without saying if you're in the industry, data underpins everything we do from a technology standpoint. It really is the, not to use a trite term, but the oil, right, that sort of like fuels technology. And so I've found over the years that I've developed a very deep passion for understanding how to understand data and information, right, that's available to me, to my organization, how to extract value out of it, like we're going to be talking about today. But yeah, I mean, to me too, it's not just about numbers, right? It's about information and how do you take assets that you may not understand that well and really learn to use them in new and different ways. So yeah, it's a very, very much a passion of mine.
Thank you, Joe.
So a little bit different than Joe. A nerd, yes, but definitely not a data person. So not a ones and zeros person. I am always been on the business side, always been on the innovation side. So my experience with data is, yeah, we need data. That's about the extent of it. But no, more seriously, I am now growing into that and learning a heck of a lot more from the team on our data analytics team. But we're a little bit more on the strategy side. How are we going to use it? What value will it bring to the airport? And how do we drive efficiency? So a numbers guy, yeah, but not at the extent that Joe is.
Well, I am a numbers girl as well, but my passion started maybe 10 years ago or so, and I've realized that you can diagnose a good and bad design by looking at data as an indicator. So fell in love with data and stayed since there. All right, well, let's dive into the topic, and perhaps we can start with future gazing and looking ahead. What's the future of data and AI? We've witnessed in my opinion, two transformations that happened recently or in the past few years. First one, the businesses started collecting their own data and not relying on third-party providers. And they wanted to own that direct relationship with customers. And the second one is this realization that data is not a byproduct of operations, but the data is a strategic asset that you can utilize to create value out of it. Joe, so I know you had, as you said, 30 plus years of experience in this field, and you went through perhaps multiple iterations of businesses going through, data transformation. As you're looking ahead into the future, what are the new waves and trends that might come our way and businesses can perhaps monetize or utilize it?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting, right? I mean, if you think about sort of the evolution of information management over the last few decades, right? As we've progressed from what I would call sort of utilitarian use of data, right? It was almost sort of an afterthought. It was a way of enabling business processes to be more efficient, more effective, more productive, which is great. But what we've seen over the last, I'd say, really last 10 to 15 years is a shift in mindset within the business community about what data is and where the potential sort of value proposition lies with data and information management, which has been fantastic. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of like bringing everyone along on that journey, because it is sort of hard to wrap your head around, what information do I have, right? So I think about like banking, for instance, how do I know the breadth of information I have? How do I develop an understanding of what it is? How can I use it to make sort of different decisions? And it gets complicated too, depending on which industry you're in, right? So regulatory concerns become a bit of a challenge as well, right? But again, that shift toward thinking about information more as a strategic asset versus just something you have to figure out how to manage to be able to do business has been really exciting. And without question, like you were saying, Lusine, the revolution we've seen really just in the last, honestly, 2 to 3 years, right, with generative AI and the conversations that topic has spurred has been really exciting, because now it's sort of in everybody's mind. The challenge with that, I think, is the one that we've really kind of always had, and that is, how do you manage your information effectively, right? And so that's sort of the boring side of the conversation with data and information management. How do you govern it, right? How do you understand where it's coming from, understand the quality of the data you've got? How do you manage it once you've got it? How do you ensure that it's getting to the right people? How do you ensure it's not getting to the wrong people, right? All those things that are sort of like, almost like table stakes, if you will, for being able to become more effective in how you use data. Those are the things that are really sort of critical and foundational in terms of being able to make that next transition from just basic information usage to extracting value further.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, Joe. And what we're noticing with our clients as well, there's a lot of eagerness and willingness to work with data and extract value, but sometimes there is a kind of management of expectations, what you have on the ground versus where you want to achieve, for example, with Gen AI technology, as well as sometimes, people don't know where to start. And my little secret is always start with consumer and customer. Look at the pain points, look at the journeys, look at the cute moments of the experience, because those are the good places to start. Because as I said, I fell in love with data as an indicator to diagnose bad design and experience. That's my way through the monetization process. Paul, DFW, as you said, largest and busiest airport out there in the world, handling millions of passengers annually and most probably millions of data points plus. It was fascinating for me to learn that actually, the data landscape is very different to our typical business organizations. So you have quite a complex ecosystem of actors, data owners. These are the TSA, airlines. As you think into the future and organizations that might be in similar situations as the FW, do you have any tips or or any suggestions? How can they start utilizing data horizontally, perhaps to deliver innovation or do transformations?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So for the airport. Yeah, we have TSA and we have Customs and Border Patrol, right? So those are our big government partners. And they have very specific data restrictions and data policies and privacy policies. And you want that too, because you're a customer. So you don't want your data shared when you go through TSA pre-check with just anybody. So there's rules there. And then as you said, we have concessionaires, all those food and beverage providers that are in throughout the terminals, right? They're all there, and we get all their point of sale data that they share with us. And then we have our airline partners across how many airlines? 22 airlines fly out of DFW, and they have their rules, and we're a big American airline shop just like Charlotte is. So they have their rules on what data they're going to share, what's operational data and what's not. And I think sometimes passengers don't realize that the airport, we're the hook around all of that. We're the coordinator of all of that, but I don't know that you're in my airport. I don't. The airline knows you checked in. TSA knows you went through the checkpoint. Chick-fil-A knows that you bought something with your credit card, but I don't even know you're there. And we're in an interesting situation where we are trying to facilitate that passenger experience. We want you to make your connection. We are trying to make sure that you can get from Terminal E to Terminal A, right? You're in a rush. We're trying to tell you what discounts you might be able to get for food or beverages. We know that you're a repeat user, but I don't know who you are. So that's where the discussions come in. So to get to your point, it's every person we talk to, we have to sit down and negotiate what data we're going to share and why we want to share it. And so the angle we're taking is no one's just going to give the airport data, and I just don't want your personal data anyway. I don't want to store your personal data. But what data can, let's say, the airline provide me? Maybe you're just a number with a repeat flyer. You're a number going from Chicago to Texas. Great. Maybe that's all I need to know. And how do we start having that conversation? If I take your data from the airline, what value am I going to give back to the airline? So it's not just me taking data, it's what value would I give them? Maybe I could say, look, I can make a much better passenger experience. You won't miss connection flights. So that's the conversation we're having with everybody. It's, yeah, I want your data, but I also want to give you value back because you share data with me, and I don't want more data than I need. I just don't want to collect data. I think that's another scary thing. Everybody wants data, and I think we're taking the approach of, well, what data do I really need? I don't want everything. I just need this much. And so I think that's how we're changing the conversation.
Yeah, and it's also fascinating for me to learn that essentially in the physical realm of airport, you control the experience of the passenger, but that there are gaps in visibility in the digital layer up there in the cloud, and you have to do this orchestration of value exchanges between the partners.
And every airport's different. So, for example, and not to get into the airport business so much, but the DFW airport, we're a connector. People come through DFW and move and go. So you're in and you're out. If you're Vegas, Las Vegas, that's a destination airport. But you're not going to download the DFW app if you're a connector. 65% of our business is connection. So you're not going to download, let's say, 50 different airport apps on your phone just because you go to Chicago or you go to Texas. So unless you log in and connect with me and say you want to talk to me, I don't have any relationship with you. So that's the complex challenge that we're facing, knowing that most people are coming through DFW and would never download the DFW app. Although I expect everybody to download the DFW app now, so that you know what's going on. But I mean, so every airport's a little bit different based on their business model.
Yeah. And do you think there's a technological solution to that, or is this some kind of phygital design, or is this a design challenge?
I'm going to look at the tech guy over here, but no, there is a solution for it. But the challenges become, we start crossing into the privacy and opting in conversation. Like, let's be honest. I know, we can tell that your phone is in my terminal, right? So it's just a matter of trying to identify how much do I need to know about that phone, and who that is.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, there is a little solution out there called clean room data, which is an interesting one to look into maybe. But I am a true believer that the experience itself and the way you orchestrate a passenger through physical and digital could be the answer to this. Thank you for sharing. Well, let's dive into, I guess, data monetization topic itself. We know it could be in many different forms. We can monetize it or create value out of it. The most traditional way is just to sell the data to the third parties, or perhaps you package it in the form of a services or a dashboard. You put a subscription model around it, and again, you could find your customers, or you use it for your internal operations and efficiencies. So those are kind of my ideas, perhaps, of what data monetization could be. Joe, I would love to hear your definition of what data monetization is. And perhaps if there are any interesting ways that you've seen people use it that are exciting.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And what you're saying aligns very closely with how I think about it too, right? I don't think about, well, you can think about data monetization in I'll call it the traditional sense, right? Of like a telemarketing company buying customer information to be able to sell magazines to or whatever it is, right? To me, that's really almost like the level 0 use case for monetization. It's easy to do in theory, but it's hard to get good data, and so it ends up being a very commoditized sort of like approach to monetization. And in fact, if you're in a regulated industry like banking, right, it's not something you want to do anyway, right? So what are the ways that you can generate value out of your data? And I tend to look at things sort of in the 3 legs of the stool, right? Revenue is absolutely one. How do you generate more revenue? How do you optimize or reduce cost? And then thirdly, how do you manage or mitigate risk, right? Those are the 3 things I tend to think about when I'm thinking about how value is either created or utilized, right? And so for companies that aren't in the business of monetizing data, what I often when I was a consultant, so when I used to recommend these things, we would have conversations about how you can leverage your information to be more effective internally first, right? Get some practice with monetizing your data and thinking about how you use it differently. So for my current company, we talk about data-driven banking, right? How do you change the conversation to driving towards more informed decisions about how you operate your business, really at all levels? And then we get into how do we use technology and information to better and more effectively manage risk, and that's great from a regulatory standpoint. They like to hear that. And then how do we interface more effectively with customers, offer them more appropriate products, give them better customer experience, all those things. But we look at things sort of in stages and sort of like levels of maturity. And so to get outside of banking for a minute, think about, let's say you're a waste management company, right? How would you leverage your information potentially to generate value or maybe even generate some revenue? Well, you probably have a pretty good understanding of residential sort of waste production, right? And you have a pretty good sense for, or you could, if you collected the data, for behavioral patterns, right? And would that information be valuable to a home construction company or to a new community that's developing property? Let's say you're a dry cleaner, right? You probably could collect data on sort of like longevity of clothing, right? You know your customers, and you could tag clothing, right? And be able to track that through time and be able to provide that information back to clothing manufacturers, right? For different materials they use in manufacturing. So it's things like that maybe are a little bit outside the box that could be really interesting things to look at depending on what industry you're in. The point is that it's important not to think about how do I make money off my data, or really even how do I generate money off my data. It's what are the things I could do, right? What are the use cases that make sense for me and my business? How can I start out small to gain some knowledge and understanding, think about prototyping or proof of concept, and then begin to leverage that into more, and more mature capabilities over time. So.
Your regulatory space, first of all, I love the three pillars and framework you just highlighted. Your regulatory space kind of prompted me towards the question is, what do you think of the synthetic data? And can it be used to be monetized, or is that a good idea to?
So, honestly, we do think about synthetic data. We haven't looked at it from a monetization standpoint. My initial reaction is, yeah, absolutely it could be, and we can kind of explore that a little bit. So synthetic data is probably if you're familiar with it or not, I should say, it's what it sounds like, right? It's data you make up and you use it for different use cases. A lot of times you can use it for system testing. If you don't have access to customer data, or you can't use it for regulatory reasons, you create data that looks like real data and you use that to test systems. You can use it to train neural network algorithms, right, for language models. You can use it for different things like that. And the question is, could you use it potentially to monetize? And the answer is yes, right? If you design your synthetic data based on real data, right? If you use the characteristics of real data, the metadata associated with real data, to generate that synthetic data, that absolutely could have intrinsic value to someone else. And that actually touches on a point you made, Paul, about partnerships, right? If you find partners in your industry or related adjacent industries that are interested in what you have to offer, that could be a great way to not violate privacy concerns, right, or ethical concerns, but give the same, almost like I won't call it a digital twin necessarily, but a good sort of representation of your customer base to a partner to be able to do whatever they want to do with it, right?
I love that. And digital twin is one of my favorites. Paul, I know DFW is not going to sell their data. No. How does DFW map to this framework that Joe outlined? How do you, is it efficiency or risk piece?
Yeah, well, we definitely don't sell data. We collect certain data, and then we try to figure out how do we operationalize it. So exactly to your point, Joe, we have three things. How do we generate more revenue? How do we improve the passenger experience? And then how do we generate more efficiency? So on the revenue side, for example, we call it non-aeronautical revenue. So if you think about an airport, all the concessions, all the parking, all the rental cars, hotels, that's non-aeronautical revenue. So that's how we generate top-line revenue. So we have a very sophisticated parking yield management system. So if you just think about an airport our size, there's about 42,000 parking spaces. So 42,000 parking spaces that we have 200 different price points every day on you booking a parking spot at DFW Airport. And we change that every day, matched against the occupancy data per terminal, per parking lot, and then we match that against data on drive-ups. So if you just drove up and you didn't pre-park, right? So that model we run consistently, and that's how we generate $250 million worth of parking revenue every year. And we can constantly make that model better, learn from that model, and during thunderstorms, during high peak days, during July 4th versus Labor Day, what can we sell, what can't we sell? Can I convince you to park rather than take an Uber because the price point is X? So we spend a lot of time on monetizing that. On the operational side of it, to be more efficient, we have, let's say, what's the number one stress point when you travel to an airport? Should I do audience participation here? Queuing, which is the checkpoint, right? Everybody hates the checkpoint, right? So the idea for us at DFW is how do we make it as frictionless as possible for you, because a more satisfied customer spends more money, right? If you're happy and chill, when you come in, you're gonna get a coffee, you're gonna hang out, you're gonna enjoy the experience. So we try to de-stress that whole part of the journey. So what do? We take the data from our checkpoints, we track that queue line, and then we provide it to you. So before you come to the airport, you know which checkpoint wait time is, and you can pick a different checkpoint. And we run that constantly, and it's constantly updated. So you know that the TSA check line is only 8 minutes, or it's 2 minutes, or it's 20 minutes, and then maybe you want to come at a different time. And then we run predictive models off of that. So if you do need to get to the airport at 2 o'clock and you see that the checkpoint you want to get into is 30 minutes long, hey, maybe come at 2:15 because it's only going to be 5 minutes. So how do we take all that data and process it and give it back to you? And we run that across everything from our busing optimization models. How do we make sure the buses are there when you need it? How many people are sitting there on the curb? Do I need to send more buses to pick you up because suddenly there was a backup of flights? This is all the data that we use to optimize and create more efficiencies. And the last thing, of course, is security. Obviously, every airport has a lot of security needs, and we run a lot of AI models against security. So think about we have about 4,000 cameras at DFW Airport. You can't have one person looking at 4,000 cameras, right? So we need AI and the AI models to run that, to let us know that, hey, that car is parked there too long. Why is there nobody in that car on the curb? Things like that. So all of that is going on behind the scenes of your experience.
Can you have a conversation with Charlotte Airport, please? That sounds really great.
Wow. I don't know what to say to that one. I love Charlotte.
I do too. I love it. Don't get me wrong,
they're great friends of ours.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome stuff you got there, Paul.
Paul, I love how you're using data to simulate time. And I'm wondering, is there a way to perhaps create an experience in the customer mind where the time is either slowed down or it's faster for experience? If you're in a queue, you want to finish it quicker, but perhaps, if you are enjoying your book, it feels longer. Is there a way to manipulate time with data, I guess?
It's an interesting point you make. I think it depends on each airport, right? So the European airports are much different than the U.S. airports, and it's a completely different business model. So when you come to a place like DFW Airport, we are, in a good way, we are a machine, right? We are moving people, and so when you come to our airport, you want to move. Like you're there, and you need to go get your connection, and you want the same if you're, originating or a destination passenger at DFW. So our idea is, how do I make it no wait for you? So our goal is you don't wait at DFW Airport. So if I can push it through the security line faster because I can give you the times, great. Then you feel like, hey, this is great. If I can make sure I'm tracking all the concession lines, so I know when there's a line that's 20 minutes long at Chick-fil-A, and for some reason all you people still want to go to Chick-fil-A even though the line is 20 minutes long. I don't know. I don't know what Chick-fil-A is doing there. It's a chicken on a bun, but that's great. But if I can show you the coffee lines and you can say, wait a second, I don't want to wait there, I can go here. So it's how do I take the wait so that you're a more relaxed passenger, because stressful passengers in an airport are not good for anybody, right? That gets you a lot of attention that you probably don't want in an airport. So it's not that I'm trying to prolong the time, it's more of that I'm making you feel probably less stressed and you can use your time differently or more enjoyably.
Yeah. It will be fascinating to track stress through space.
We call that sentiment, right? So we're doing sentiment analysis now. So there's technology where we can judge people's moods and their sentiment, and we can tell if it's going in the wrong direction. And then what do we need to do? We send out the dogs, right? The petting dogs, and they make everybody feel better. No, I'm serious. Like, it works.
That's great.
I know it's not data, but it works.
Yeah. It's a happy data. Maybe this is the question for both of you. So I'm a business. I have lots of data. I want to start perhaps some innovation process or transformation process, but I don't know where to start from. And maybe in the kind of stakeholder mindset is like, which data is worthwhile? Can I put a price tag and say, okay, if I use this data, it's going to create or generate X amount of value. Are there any practical steps that stakeholders can take, or is this the worth doing exercise, or we're coming from completely different side of the problem?
Okay, I'll go. So from our standpoint, we always start with the business problem. Sounds logical, right? Start with the business problem, but we try not to start with data. We start with the business problem and say, okay, what's your issue and what are you trying to solve for? And then we go back and we say, okay, do we have data that can actually support that hypothesis or problem statement? And a lot of times we might not have the data, and that's where we have to decide, okay, is the impact of this problem statement, do we believe it's worth the work that might be in getting the data, because sometimes you might not even have it, so you're going to install sensors on all the moving walkways because we're trying to figure out how to do preventative maintenance. I'm making this up. Is it worth doing that in order to get the data? And if it is, great. And then you have to obviously, we have to store it, catalog it, and then run the analysis and the algorithm. And is the juice going to be worth the squeeze for that business problem? And that's just a realistic conversation, because there's 100 projects to do or more. You've got to prioritize. Is it worth crunching all this data to solve that one problem? Or can we just get by without it? And it sounds bad, but there's just so much to do. You got to pick and choose. And so we always say, what's the impact of the problem statement? And then what's the feasibility of managing all that data? Yeah. And if we don't have it, then we have to have a discussion of what's the lift. Because we don't have a ton of data scientists and data analysts at DFW. That's just the nature of it, right? So we have to spread our resources against all those problems.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. Right, it's going to be driven by the objectives of the business. That it has to start there. This is back to the point I made earlier about the boring stuff, right? If you don't understand your data, and by that I mean not just exactly what it is, but also the quality and what you can do with it, right? So you have to have a business problem you're trying to solve or address, and then you have to understand the information you have at your availability to be able to address it, right? And if you don't have those two things figured out, then you're going to be in trouble. So, yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and sometimes also an interesting exercise is to assess how unique your data point is, because most probably, everyone is collecting the same data. Your competitors, you're not too far off from your competitors in terms of the data you've collected. So this is where it comes to the, to the decision making. Am I going to go and enhance the data to make it maybe more unique, or I'm going to come from problem perspective and create a value which is unique and then fit that data towards it?
That's a culture thing, right? To a degree, it's culture and skills, and that's hugely important. I look at, you think back, I don't know, 20 years ago, there were two credit card companies, well, there were more than two, but there were two that I'm going to talk about. There was a company called Providian, which was a credit card company that offered subprime credit cards to customers, and Capital One, which was essentially in the same business. The difference is that Capital One was built upon the concept of understanding their customers deeply and analytically, right? And so Capital One was able to construct credit products that made sense for the customer base they were targeting. They were able to provide access to credit to customers who wouldn't normally be able to get it. And they were able to make money to stay in business along the way as well, whereas Providian, unfortunately, was not able to do that. They didn't have the same understanding of their customers and the data they had. It was the same exact data, right, in a sense, right, but they didn't manage it in the same way. And so in addition to having good data, you've really got to have the ability to understand how to manage it and drive some of the predictive analysis you were talking about earlier to be able to get that value out of the data.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about when you mentioned that it's going after external data. So, and today we're actually having this conversation because we're looking at congestion and traffic. And so we have a lot of data around the congestion and traffic on our property, but the extension was, well, does anybody have congestion and traffic data outside of the airport? So for example, your highways, right? What's happening on the highways before you get to the airport? Because if there's congestion on the airport, can we get any kind of predictive model that shows us why is that congestion happening and is it coming from somewhere else? So, but exploring that data and trying to find out, is it worth getting that data and how are we going to use that data against our data? That's a realistic conversation. Do I really need camera data from all the highways, which is public, and try to capture that in order to help predict congestion at our airport? Yeah. So those are some of the use cases that we're exploring.
Or perhaps you could create a synthetic version of the simulation, and try to look ahead of time. I know we spoke a lot about synthetic data, predictive models, AI. It is clear to me that the data is going to grow. The appetite to collect it, most probably yes as well, unless there's a limit on the data collection and the price of storage. But then the only way you can create meaningful insights is through AI. So reliance on AI is going to increase as well significantly with Gen AI, etc. So I'm wondering, Joe, what is the balance that stakeholders can strike between monetizing, commercializing data versus being responsible in the way you use AI?
Oh boy, yeah, that's a good one. That's a deep and long conversation. Generative AI is presenting opportunities to us that never really existed before, right? In terms of being able to, and you can argue about the hallucination effects and what have you, but its ability to take large quantities of data, summarize, and allow you to draw conclusions from that data, that capability is just growing by leaps and bounds, right? And we're in a position now where it can be tempting to basically dump your entire data set into a large language model or something equivalent, right, and try to draw conclusions and then use that to to drive additional revenue from it. And there are cases where that makes sense, but we have to be cautious about how we approach that, right? And it's not just for banking, and it's not just satisfying the regulators. I think we have an ethical responsibility to make sure that we're using our customers' information appropriately. So one of the things I'm helping to drive at Truist is our focus on responsible AI. How do we make sure that we are thinking about what we're trying to do from an ethical standpoint, considering bias, making sure that we're not violating any privacy laws or privacy policies we have in place within the company, helping operating units within the bank understand those policies and sort of have a consistent one bank view about how we approach this. It's very much it's not something you can systematize, right? It's not a technology solution. It's a conversation among people to make sure we're all on the same page and we all have the right mindset about how we're using these new technologies. It's going to be an ongoing conversation as the technology evolves and becomes more sophisticated. But even now, we have to be very cautious and careful about how we approach it.
And as we build, data-intensive products, how can we make sure that they are ethically correct or perhaps responsible from the AI perspective?
Yeah, so controls, right? Governance. That's really the best way to approach it. And so, for instance, we've developed an entire governance process around the use of AI at Truist. And we have involvement from leadership across all the divisions as well as our key risk partners within the organization. And we spend a lot of time talking about how we make sure that capabilities, as we're designing them, that they make sense, right? And then we're thinking about the ethical aspects of how we're using AI. As we're developing the process, that we're testing it along the way to make sure that it's meeting the criteria we have to avoid bias and fair use of information, that we're not either unfairly using private data, consumer or customer data, or exposing customer data in a way that we shouldn't be, right? We have all those controls in place along the way, and then post-fact, after implementation, human in the loop is always going to be an important part of that for us to make sure that what we're getting out of that, the systems we're implementing, meets with our criteria, with the policies we've put in place.
So the policies baked in both into the technology and the processes, the way you handle it.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, okay, great. I have to ask you referenced Gen AI multiple times. What's your personal perspective on Gen AI? And perhaps are we ready to put it out there on enterprise level and productionize it?
So the answer is this. Okay, I'm a huge proponent of AI in general and generative AI in particular. I love being able to say it because it's oxymoronic. But my point is that the technology has huge advantages in the right use cases, right? So if you understand what it does and what it can do for you, it's a great tool. If you overestimate its capabilities, if you apply it to the wrong situations, you're gonna have a bad time, right? And so I think about an airline example. By the way, I love non-aeronautical revenue. I love that. I got to remember that. Air Canada. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. Last year, there was an interesting case where Air Canada, a customer went online, and they needed to fly for a funeral, right? Bereavement fare, right? And so the customer went onto the website and inquired, can I buy a ticket now? I have to fly today. Can I buy a ticket now and get reimbursed? And the website responded, yes, you can. You can do that. That's part of our policy. The customer took the flight, submitted the ticket for reimbursement, and the airline said, we don't do that, right? And what had happened is the customer had interacted with an LLM, and it had basically hallucinated the answer that it was allowable to do that. The case went to court, and the court, decided in favor of the customer. The airline said, well, this was a computer system. It doesn't represent us. It's not a person. And the court said, well, that's ridiculous, right? You've represented it as a, part of your company. You have to honor this ticket. And the point there is that they do make mistakes. And we can go into the reasons why that happens, but the point is that it does. And if you assume, like most people think about generative AI as like a computer system with fixed rules, and if A, then B, and they don't really work that way, right? So you have to have controls and governance in place to ensure that it's not making poor decisions. I told someone recently that they asked me what I thought of generative AI, and I said, I think it's a great productivity tool. And it is, right? And this person was surprised with my response. They said, well, isn't it more than that? I said, well, not yet. As it becomes more sophisticated, as we put controls in place around it that are automated, that allows it to make decisions that are more trustworthy, that'll change perhaps. But for now, we have to assume that we're going to get, unexpected results that we have to be able to anticipate.
Yeah. So you wouldn't put Gen AI in a critical infrastructure pool?
I wouldn't necessarily do that, no. And I was going to say I wouldn't get inside a self-driving car just yet, but maybe I would. I don't know. But the point is that, like, if there are critical situations it's important to have a human in the loop to make sure that the results that are coming out of that system, right, are accurate.
Yeah. So how does the human in the loop system work? Because everyone most probably heard of that phrase, and in generative AI terms, how can you orchestrate that technologically?
Couple of different ways, right? So one of the ways is in training the systems themselves, right? So you have people involved in the actual training of the system, so it's not just this automated process where the system learns on its own. You have people that are both evaluating the results of the training and also providing input to guide the system to evolve in a way that gets to answers that you want and expect. The other way is you put someone in between the system and the consumer, as an example. So if you're in a call center, you don't necessarily, in some cases it's fine, right? If it's a simple request, right, you're not necessarily, let's say, transferring money, right? You're just answering a question. It's fine to have a chat bot or an automated system interacting directly with the customer, but in situations where there's a financial impact or maybe a high-risk sort of interaction, you'd want to have a person in between the system and the customer, right? So you could have an LLM that's providing suggestions to the call center rep, but the call center rep will be having the conversation with the customer.
Yeah.
That's an example.
Yeah, that's a great example. A controlled version of the output and then checked by the humans.
That's
before
correct.
it's
Yes,
being
just to make sure that it makes
communicated.
sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's great. I know the kind of executive stakeholders and the businesses out there being bombarded by implementing Gen AIs. What will be your advice, perhaps, Paul? Do you have an opinion on? I guess in the innovation process, there's a tendency to jump into the new tools and shiny tools and try them out.
Yeah, so I mean, a little easier when you're saying you're on the innovation side of it, because you can try and test the new tools. But we're just like any other company when we talk AI and when we talk generative AI. So we're on our early journey on Gen AI, and of course, typical company, we said, okay, these are the guidelines. This is what we're going to do. We want it pointed at our data. We're not just going to let people load DFW data out into the public. So understanding what Gen AI can do for a productivity standpoint is incredibly important to us. And we know, I think the bigger challenge we're having is we've got emerging technology that we're buying or that we're partnering with, and it has AI already in it, right? So that company, to your point, has already got some sort of AI in it, and we've got to go look at that and figure out what are all the rules and security issues with that. Then we have specific AI tools that we are using on our own data to run our business, and then we've got Gen AI that we're trying to do so that we can unlock data for the business so that the business can just use it to be more productive. So we've got 3 buckets of AI that we're trying to deal with and creating a strategy. And the number one question that comes back is, well, who's in charge of AI? I mean, it's a realistic question. Is it the data and analytics team? Is it IT? Is it innovation? Is it strategy? Like, who's in charge of AI in our organization? And it's kind of a tough conversation because it's a tool.
Yeah.
And the data analytics team, we spend a lot of time cleaning the data and making sure that the data is the single source of truth so that we can put the tools on it so that you can then have a human in the loop and say, yeah, that's the right answer. So lots to discuss there. Can't say that we have the answers, but we know we're going to need multiple AI solutions literally across our city, because an AI that works on contracts, which would be a huge win for us, just analyzing contracts. If you think of the thousands and thousands of contracts we have and construction contracts, having an AI tool that can do that is very different than the AI tool that's going to go look at the security cameras and find out if a car is there or not. So the vast number of solutions that we need is a big undertaking, and we're just early on in our journey with that.
That's a good point. And you touched on something I think is important. Vendors are incorporating AI into their tool sets, I mean, like crazy, as we all know. And the challenge that we have is convincing our business partners that those tools are not perfect. Because they trust their partners, right? The software works great for us. Well, that's great, but this is a new capability. We need to spend some time with it, really get to understand it and understand how to manage it. So that conversation's been interesting. And then in terms of who owns AI, that's another great question. We actually do have a head of AI and ML at Truist, but it really is a village, right? They own the philosophy around AI for the company, but they're not going to be the ones implementing on a day-to-day basis. You have to have engagement across the board.
Yeah. It's hard. It's easy. Like I said, it's easy to collect data. it's really hard to figure out how to use it, right, effectively for the business. And then when you want to liberate data for the business, we want to get out of the reporting business and let the business do what they want to do, but you've got to make it so that the business can easily access the data, and then what they access, they know that that's true, that it's accurate. And so if you don't have that trust that the data was good, then the whole thing, the whole process falls apart.
Yeah. We have this phrase at Method that foundations of data never been so foundational. Perhaps this is my last question, and we can open to the audience to ask questions. If you had a magic tool, I mean, we spoke a lot about tools and data. What that would be?
I'll go tactical on this one. And I know this probably can happen today, and I just don't know enough about it. But I would love an AI tool that would allow me to skip the capture, cataloging, and cleaning of data. Can I skip that whole process? Can AI just, whatever I inject, can it clean and catalog it for me?
Yeah.
I think that would be a great win for us right now, because the amount of time it's taking us to analyze our data and figuring out what's good and bad is really time consuming. So that'd be great if there was an AI tool that could just allow us to skip those 2 steps.
Yeah, and also perhaps, kind of that's a great one.
I'm not sure it's that great, but it does. We can talk about it later.
I would also suggest maybe some tool that is doing self-healing as well, because data gets dirty as soon as it gets cleaned as well. So it's like self-monitoring. But I agree with you. I think the AI and data engineering should come together and have something that is easy to clean, and use. Yeah. What about you, Joe?
No, I think that's a really good one. I would say sort of similarly, just from a policy and procedure standpoint, tools to help make sure that we have the right coverage in terms of how we are managing our data and how we're using it across the organization. We do a good job of that, but it would be great to have additional tools that help us make sure that we don't have any gaps. And honestly, that we're not being too sort of draconian, you know what I mean, and overly managing in certain areas. It'd be nice to have tools that would help us analyze that more effectively.
Because I especially with regulated space, it's quite hard. Legal. How do you get confirmations, access, or will they allow you to use specific tool? I guess it's a risk trade-off balance.
Right. So we are a risk-driven business. Without question, right? That is the first question we ask is, what is the level of risk? What is the residual risk of this decision? And are we willing to take that on based on the problem we're trying to address, right? And so absolutely having that full sort of scope view would be awesome.
Yeah, and mapping across all your suppliers and tools, etc. I believe, right? Third party.
Third party risk is a
third party is the risk. Yeah.
Give it up for our panelists, Joe, Lusine, and Paul.
Thank you.